Just to explain why I keep the mask on, I'm very high risk for COVID, and I got COVID last year. And I was in bed for like 2 months, and it took 5 months for me to be able to step on a tennis court, 9 months to be able to hit from the baseline, and 1 year to be able to rally. So I really want to play tennis, so I will keep my mask on. Anyways, but you got to see me without a mask for like 1 second. So, okay, good. I really cannot see anyone. Nice. So I actually wanted to give you guys an option at the beginning of the talk, because sitting through the presentation yesterday, and there were so many examples of, especially in the elections in the US, where people could not decide, and there were some legibility issues. People were not able to read very well the options. And I am a type designer, but I'm also a legibility expert. My PhD is in legibility. I've done studies with the MIT Age Lab, and I've presented to the EU Commission on type sizes and their impact on legibility as well. So if you guys like, I could, they're taking pictures, just 1 second. Hi. Just one picture where I actually looked like me. Okay, good. So back with a mask on. I really hate these things. Okay, I don't wear them for pleasure. Okay, so I wanted to give you guys the option. If you would like to ask legibility-specific questions, I am very happy to answer them. So I had planned that we would talk about type descriptors, which is a way to understand typography, which is a little bit more variable and a little bit different from how we normally understand it. But I can't see you guys, so I cannot say, show me by show of hands. So just say yes if you guys are interested that we leave like 5 minutes or something for legibility questions as well. So if you think this is a good idea, say yes. Okay, we do that. Okay, good. So, very quickly. So today's talk is primarily about CEDARS Plus, which is a type descriptor system. Normally, when we talk about typefaces, specifically within the Latin sphere, we talk about serifs, we talk about sans serifs, we talk about script, handwriting. These are categories. They are buckets in which you put different typefaces. Some typefaces can fit into more than one bucket. And the bucket system is not a flexible way to understand variability. And type design is all about variability. So if we want to translate the term, it's also responsive, if we want to think about AI, a little bit more how, with web we are thinking, but in a different type of way, responsive to other kinds of factors. So typefaces are not static things that can either be this or that. They're not binary in that sense. They are made up of different elements, and these elements give expression. So when we started I Love Typography, which was end of 2020, and then we launched in mid-2021. I Love Typography had been a blog, a very popular blog with like 500,000 Twitter followers since 2007. And then we decided to launch a font distribution platform, which we did in mid-2021. And to do that, we have the regular categories where, customers can go look for sans serifs and geometric sans, which is popular, or what else. And, but we wanted to be able to allow people to look for fonts in different ways. And that's how CEDARS came to be. Now, I will tell you a story, which is a little bit unrelated. It doesn't even relate to any of the slides, but you guys need to know where this came from. So I'm from Lebanon, which did not get called out. I think they put me in the Spain bucket. I live in Spain, but I'm Lebanese. I'm also German by nationality, so I didn't get to dance, okay, but we have one more nationality here. So I had gone from Lebanon to Reading in the UK to study type design. And I wanted to create an Arabic typeface to go along with a Latin typeface. And at Reading, they mostly teach Latin type design. So I had amazing teachers teaching me Latin, and there was no one who could help me understand how do I make harmony between scripts that are so different from one another. And I tried many things. And then at some point, we had a guest visitor. His name is Jean-François Porches. He's one of the best type designers. He's in France. He's really, really great. And he came and he was giving us feedback, and then he looked at my work and he was like, you need to look at the structure, because he, of his French accent, he always says structure. So structure, you need to look at the structure of typefaces, and that's how you can get them to speak with one another. And that's when sort of like the light bulb clicked in my head, and I sort of understood that typefaces are not just the serifs we put on the feet of letters. They are not just, you know, this or that, but in basic, as the basic component of a letter is a structure and the tool that traced it. So for you to understand what this means, just with your finger, trace on the palm of your hand, the other hand obviously, the first letter of your name. Okay? Can you do that now? I want to see you. I can't really see you. But just trace it, you know? That thing you trace is the structure. The tool in this case is your finger, right? So, so this sort of understanding of what typefaces are and how they come to be started at that point. And in my, like, I'm normally known for, as an Arabic type designer, that's normally what I usually talk about. But my ability to create conversations between Latin and Arabic came from the understanding that typefaces have DNA, and we need to understand that DNA to really be able to express and to sort of get into the bottom of things and get them to speak with one another. So that's where this came from. And the structure is the S in CEDARS, we'll get to it. It's the most important thing of everything that we're going to be speaking about. So, so when we started to like come up with these variables, these descriptors of how can we describe a typeface, it's not just serif or sans serif, because this is an extremely bad way of describing typefaces. One, it only fits for Latin, really, and there are other scripts in the world, many other, so that's not a good way to describe. And also, it's sort of like, do you know this person? Like, yeah, I know his shoes. Like, no, but the person, they can change their shoes. But no, you cannot describe a person by the shoes that they are wearing. And the serifs are the feet. They are the shoes in the outfit. Shoes are important, but there are more important elements in describing a person. So, so we needed to find other ways to describe typefaces. And I fell back on my own experience in type design. And that's how we came up with these things. So this is coming from a more practical understanding of type design. And the way that I will be showing you, sorry for the very, very long intro before a slide, but basically, I will try to show you what does it mean when we change this variable. So, just to make a comparison, if you are creating an outfit, there is the stuff that's supposed to cover the bottom half of your body, could be skirt, could be trousers, could be shorts, could be nothing, but that's something as well. There's the stuff that covers the top part of your body, could be, again, a variety of things. There's the shoes, there's the hat, there are accessories, and sometimes you can put things more on top. All of these things are variables. So you can have a skirt with a tank top, you can have jeans with a t-shirt. All of these are different variations, but there are sets of variables. The thing that covers the feet, the thing that covers the lower part of the body. So in type design, we have these variables as well. We also have font variable technology. It's different, but also a little bit similar. So, the first descriptor we're going to talk about is contrast. Contrast is the difference between the thickest part of a character and the smallest, thinnest part, not smallest, sorry, thinnest part of that character. So, for example, you can have no contrast at all, as in the example on top, or you can have extreme contrast, which is the example at the bottom. Extreme contrast normally gives you a feeling of luxury. If you think of Vogue magazine, this is the type of vibe it sort of presents. It's not very practical, so usually this is for more display purposes. The no contrast is typically, most of the times we see this in the very utilitarian type of sans serifs, usually geometric sans, but it could be any style. Any style could be in no contrast, because anything that can be written with a tool, which is like a little pen that has no change in the direction, that doesn't give you contrast. So the no contrast is, in today's world, what is most seen as contemporary, and that speaks to contemporary culture, the no contrast and the low contrast. So when we're thinking about UI and UX, most of you will already automatically be choosing sans serif typefaces, and sans serif typefaces are typically low in contrast, or no contrast at all. It depends. So, so you are automatically going in that direction. This is not a bad thing, because when we have extreme contrast, it feels like the screen is flickering. Extreme contrast is really nice when you see it in very big, or when you print it on paper and there's a little bit of ink spread. But when we see it on screen and there's quite a lot of these very thin lines, we get what we call this shimmering effect. It's shining, and that's not nice. One example, which pisses me off a lot, Lloyds Bank, which is my bank in the UK, recently changed the typeface of their app, and now it has a lot of contrast, and I fucking hate it. So I might actually like send them an email and put my resume at the back and just tell them why this is not a good typeface for this. But anyways, so you want comfort, and so you need to take the shining out of it. So that's one of the reasons why we go with less contrasted typefaces. Contrast is also the reason why serifs are typically not used in UI as well, on screen in general, because most serif typefaces have contrast, and contrast gives you this flickering effect. When we had low resolution screens, that was even worse. We didn't have enough resolution to render the very delicate thins of a serif typeface. Now we are in a better situation, but we also have the possibility to not reject serifs completely, because it's the contrast in serifs that makes them a little bit uncomfortable on screen. And if we go for a low contrast serif, then that could resolve the problem, which means that we have a possibility of expression which is different from just using a random sans serif again and again and again. And this is why it's interesting that when we dissect typefaces into these different variables, and we understand the impact of every one of this variable, it allows us to sort of unlock our imagination and unlock the possibilities of how can we express with type, given the circumstances with which type has to perform. And this is, again, just an example of how we see when there is no contrast at all versus when we have extreme contrast. So the next thing is energy. Now, energy is something that is very rarely talked about in type design in general, or typography, but we should. So imagine that you are writing an application for a university, or application for a bank or something, or you're at the customs and you're writing your name in. When you write, you will write slowly, deliberately, and very clearly, right, usually. Now imagine if you are leaving a note for someone, and for some reason you didn't text them. You're leaving a note on a paper somewhere, and you're just saying, hey, I'm going out to get some food. And you will write usually very quickly. And that higher energy level has an impact on what the shapes look like. They will become more round, they will become more organic, but they will also embed the typeface with a higher energy level, and it will give a different impact of more mobility, more freedom, and a little bit more, energy. So when we are looking at typefaces, we have typefaces where nothing moves. And so on the one extreme, we have static. Usually, like one of these, like slabs, are usually quite static because they're circular based, so a little bit like the geometric sans. And the geometric sans, these, because they're based on geometry, like very close to pure geometry of circles and squares and what else, you don't feel like the letters move, and the impact is a very static one. So things don't move on that paragraph or on that page. But on the other hand, when you have very high energy levels within typefaces, the most extreme is very high, obviously, then you go into the more script kind of typefaces, and these will suddenly become more like sports kind of typefaces, or occasions where you need to embed energy in a design. But it doesn't mean that your traditional sans serif or traditional serif cannot have higher energy levels. So if, for example, you're still working for, a traditional brand, but you want to make it look a little bit younger, you go for a typeface that has a little bit more energy, because that energy signifies either youth or movement, or at least the ability to move, right? And so this is quite good. And so energy level comes with the energy of the movement that created the letter. And so having something higher with that is something that can subconsciously speak to the reader, so that they feel like, they are very dynamic. This is quite interesting. Let's see what they have, okay? And this is, again, you see with the modes of expression, the ability to move very quickly translates into letter forms that have been written in a very fast movement, and it translates into a different energy level, versus if you want something very solid, very calm, then you go into the more static. Like both the static and very high energy, like it's not like one is good and one is bad. This is just a spectrum of variability from which we can find our way. Sans serifs in general are more in the low energy level, like calm, we call them calm, and sometimes the geometric signs, we put them in the static. So another category, not category, like descriptor is the details. We actually lumped several types of details into one. And the first detail we want to talk to is the finials, which is how letters finish, how a stroke finishes, what happens at the end of a stroke. They can be restrained, so you finish. It's like when you're writing very neat on the customs border in the US, and they're gonna not let you in the country if you write in red, which has happened. They make you go back and write it in blue. But anyways, it's not the color, it's like how neat you write. So it's very restrained, that motion. Versus it's a little bit more flourished, and like, okay, I'm writing and I can leave a little bit more movement. And this kind of difference between restrained and flourished, again, gives you a power of expression. When you are more flourished, you are more relaxed, and you are a little bit more artistic maybe, or a little bit more relaxed, or a little bit more casual, a little bit more informal. This is what comes when you are going for a more flourished kind of finial at the end. And we see this in the lower part of the N or the L or the I, when we see this little kind of flourish. I mean, it could be flourished with a big flourish, but it could also be flourished with a little bit of this kind of outstroke. Another detail is the stem, and how does the stem actually finish? So we can have different types of stems. So we have the angled, which is a little bit here like when you have, you know, comic books or what else, and you have these kinds of titles and they are cut at an angle. Or you can have flared, so with a little bit of an expansion at the bottom. The stem is the vertical stroke, the vertical line in like the letter L, that's the stem in Latin. And so you can have a flare. And what happens at the bottom of that stem is very important because it sort of, again, gives you a lot of hints as to what the typeface's personality is like. If you are cutting what we call blunted, which is like just a cut like this is your typical serious kind of typeface. Or not necessarily serious, but it's like the standard kind of way of a cut. When you have a little bit of an expansion, you're going into a little bit something, a little bit more luxury. When you have serifs, then obviously we're going more into the serif mode, but the serif is a detail in CEDARS Plus, not like in the normal categories we talk about in Latin when we say serif versus sans serif. This is why we have sort of banished the serif into a detail, because all of these other elements are more important to the personality of the typeface than the shoes. So again, it's very interesting to see what happens, and also because you are able to use this to describe different script systems without needing to import the vocabulary of one and putting it on the other. Like we as in like I, don't like colonizing other scripts by Latin. So I don't like when someone tells me, give me a sans serif Arabic, because Arabic does not have serifs in the first place, so why are we calling it sans serif? So to be able to be a little bit more democratic and equal in how we talk about typefaces across different scripts, we need to come up with a way to understand why they look the way they do, in a way that can be explaining for every type of script, and not just Latin. So another detail, and this is quite interesting, because again, it's not something that we typically talk about, is the transition. And the transition is what happens between vertical stems and those arches. So we have like one extreme, like there's blended, there's intersecting. These are usually the options, or mixed. But basically in the blended, you see that the top arch is smoothly moving into the vertical, okay? In the intersecting, it just goes into it, yeah? So there's a corner. You might think this is not important, but actually it's very important in establishing the rhythm of a typeface. If we want to have the type of rhythm which is a little bit more abrupt, we will put an intersection. If we want an overall rhythm that is very smooth, we put a blended kind of intersection. And this is very interesting because it's a kind of detail, like it's very small, but it's in almost every letter. And so when it repeats, suddenly the texture of the typefaces change dramatically. So it's very interesting to keep an eye on what is the impact if we put a corner or if we put an arch. So another detail is the fill. So we can have inline, we can have textured, we can have solid. These are just basically just what's the fill, what's inside the letter, okay? So they're very easy, and like obviously in UI design, you're not using this so much. In web design, we don't see so much experimentation in typography, but they are there, and they're available for you to play with and to utilize. Something that would be really nice to bring into web typography that has been alive in print typography for centuries is this ability to express typographically, and there were some really nice examples in the previous presentation about the Bauhaus, but Bauhaus is not the only thing. There are many, many ways to express with type. And also side note here, and one of the reasons why I wanted to talk, like to give this talk, is that AI is gonna learn to do what most web developers will be able to do. But it cannot express yet human feelings and emotions, and it cannot tap into the subconscious of communication. And typography is one of the ways with which you can tap into that subconscious, where you change a corner into an arch, and suddenly the entire thing speaks different. Typography is the voice that we speak with. And it's one way to go beyond the typical ways of expression. And I'm not saying that suddenly we have crazy typefaces as, you know, menu items, but I think there is more that can come, that there's still something more that we can do. Not that there isn't great work being done, true, there is, but I think there is more. And this is why I thought it would be interesting to just dig deep into what these different variables can do for us, the descriptors. Okay, now we get to the letter A. A is the axis. So when we are writing, the axis comes from the angle with which we hold the tool of writing, pen, brush, whatever it is. That's what gives us the axis. It could be coming at a 90-degree angle, or it could be tilted, and it will give a different impact. So it's one thing when it's straight, and it's one thing when it's tilted. Normally, when it's tilted forward, it gives an impression of movement, of speed. For example, in Latin, if we think of serifs and their italics, well, actually, italics in general, they have an axis which is tilted forward. And that tilt gives usually a feeling of more speed and more energy. Because it is tilting forward, it necessitates a different kind of movement. So at least it gives a bit more speedy kind of impact. And so it's quite interesting as a variable to keep in mind as well. Then we need to talk about the rhythm. And in the rhythm, we have different things. We have the pattern. And that is the typeface itself, if it's very tight or if it's very loose. Obviously, you can have the same typeface family with different variants. But it's also very interesting to keep in mind what is the impact of these decisions and what happens when we pick one which is too tight or one which is too loose. In general, when we're thinking more about menu items and what else, you don't want to go too tight because it has legibility issues. Condensed will not perform as well as a regular, usually, in legibility research. But you might want to go, if you have a variable font family, and the variable font family does have a condensed version, maybe you go not fully condensed, but a little bit condensed if you want to save space, you know? So there is room to play, and that is quite nice as well. And this is where, thinking about the CEDARS descriptors and thinking about variable fonts, there's a lot of overlap. And the width, which is what we have over here, this is the width axis. So you can go very compressed and you can go very wide. And there's an impact, of course, on the kind of feeling that the typeface gives. When you go more loose, it feels more relaxed. If you go more tight, obviously it feels more tight. No? But there are benefits to having one or the other. And this is, the difference in pattern that it generates when we have a typeface that is more condensed versus a typeface that is very loose. And then there's the tempo, which is a little bit like music. So if you're thinking in the tempo, which is a little bit more rhythmic, so it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or a tempo that would be highly regular, or a tempo that is highly irregular, like the one we see at the bottom, where like bum, da-dum, da-da-da-da, you know, so there's a little bit more of differentiation of rhythm. In general, the lower one is not so common anymore. And if you look at posters from the 20s, you see more differentiation, like the B and the R are a little bit narrower, the S as well, and then everything, the rounded characters are quite wide. There's a typeface that is actually, I should have added it, a very good example. It's called Moucha, so M-O-U-C-H-A. It recently won many awards, and in the styles, it has vintage with irregular sort of pattern. So the R and the B are tight. Then it has modern, and it has something else. So, that would be like a nice way to see the impact. And you can see here the difference, what it means when we change that impact. It's not very UI relevant, but it's quite interesting. For legibility, it's nice to have a little bit of differentiation of rhythm. And finally, we get to the structure, that thing that I asked you to trace. So within that structure, first we need to talk about the loops. The loops are the closed shapes. So we can have triangular shapes. For example, like the A, it looks like a triangle in this case. When we have a triangular kind of loop, normally it's more of a kind of script fast kind of writing. Then we have the oval, where if we think of the letter O, or the letter, you know, P or BDPQ or what else, those rounded shapes. The oval corresponds with Latin, with the humanist kind of typefaces. Frutiger would be one example, or in this case, Gemma. Circular, this is the geometric sans, which are based on actual circles. The super ellipse, which would be a little bit more the grotesque typefaces, like the Helvetica. That would be a little bit more, you know, slightly more rectangular in shape. And here you see the difference between triangular and oval. This is the hardest to get a grasp on, even for me when I made the system. But the impact is quite important because, again, it changes the rhythm of the typeface. So that element of the structure, how we draw the rounded shapes, is very important to the spirit of the typeface and how it speaks. And then this is one example. You see with the super ellipse, you can always look at the top left, top right of the N and just how rectangular that curve is. The circular is pretty much a circle. And in today's world, the trend these days is geometric sans, or grotesques, or the humanists. When it comes to legibility, the humanists are usually, they perform best. If you want to go for a grotesque, if you go for something which is very closed, like the Helvetica, where the E comes up very close to the bar, middle bar, those are less legible. If you want to use them, make sure you use them at a larger size, because that compensates for the problems of legibility. Usually size will compensate for almost any problem of legibility, but not always. So another one is construction, and this one is a little bit funny. So the formal, it doesn't mean that it's formal in the sense of like I'm wearing a black tie or what else. Formal just means that you are writing with a deliberate movement that stops. Cursive is you are writing with a deliberate movement that does not stop, but it is predictable. Both the formal and the cursive are predictable in the sense that the cursive repeats, and like whatever is vertical will remain vertical, whatever is tilted at 10 degrees will become repetitive in that sense. So there is a predictability and a deliberate motion. Because another example of this is the organic, which is unpredictable. This is your handwriting, yeah? So the cursive is a little bit more what you would have in formal script typefaces, but the organic is a bit more like all over the place and is more freeform. And again, the kind of, whoop, I skipped a slide. Yeah, now I skipped a lot, okay. Yeah, this is funny, okay. Well, I skipped my favorite slide. Well, I'm gonna show it to you guys. But anyways, that's the last slide anyways. But we have this funny thing with the cursor where I have to click. Yeah, here it is. That's the slide. Yeah, so it's very interesting as well to keep an eye on what happens within that kind of structured because it gives, again, the expression of the typeface, especially when you go from the difference between handwriting and script kind of styles, because of how predictable versus unpredictable that structure would be. So the point in all of these things, if there is one, is that when we think of typefaces, we need to think of systems of variability. It's not just a box with a label that says sans serif, therefore use it. No. There is a lot of expression within the details of a typeface, of how it speaks, and how it speaks to the subconscious of the reader that we want to be in charge of. If I wanted to say something to a person, then I want to be in control of that message. So I want to understand what is the impact, what is the difference in expression between one sans serif and the next. I need to control that conversation to be able to express in a powerful way, which is optimized and is in line with the brand personality or whatever that website is trying to say. So this is why it's interesting to dig deep and to sort of look beyond the big labels of serif versus sans serif. And then the other thing is that I forgot to mention, I should have mentioned. So this descriptor system, it's a filtering system on I Love Typography. So every typeface that we have can be described in CEDARS, whether they are Latin or Arabic or Hebrew or Greek or Cyrillic or what else. So you can actually search for typefaces via these filters. You can say, I want something high energy, low contrast, and then it will give you. But anyways, the most important part is to dig a little bit deeper into the expression of typefaces, and I hope this was helpful. And if you have legibility questions, I'm very, very up for that as well. Okay, thank you.